We continue to celebrate the Blackhawks winning the Stanley Cup 10 years ago today in an epic Game 6 overtime win. Patrick Sharp, a big part of that Stanley Cup run, and of course the two cups that followed thereafter. He joins us now. It's been 10 years, Patrick, and I still can't believe the way that it all ended. Hardly anybody saw that puck cross the line except for Patrick Kane. And I think you, based on the video evidence that I've been trying to pull up, did you see it right away? And what do you remember about that moment?
I did. It was a great memory in my mind. It gets better and better every year that goes by the calendar. I was in the high slot. Kaner had the puck on his strong side on the half wall, makes a little move on Kimmo Timonen. And so often at that point in Kaner's career, he wasn't really a shooter. He was always looking to pass the puck. And I was just kind of hoping he was going to throw one to the slot so I could get a shot on net, create some havoc. He shoots it from a tough angle. And where I was in the high slot, I saw the back pad on the bottom of the ice kind of flicker a little bit. I saw Kaner's reaction. I figured, hey, that puck's in the back of the net, and we just won in overtime. We're Stanley Cup champs. So it was kind of a unique celebration. We celebrated a few different times based on when the refs actually announced it was a goal. We looked kind of silly, but thank God it counted because, boy, if we would have had to pick up our stuff and continue playing, that might have been a tough situation to be in.
Yeah, that would have been tricky to try to reset after losing your gloves up in the stands. But what was the overriding theme of that team? You had a great team. You were a team on the rise. Did you guys feel pressure that playoff run to win a Stanley Cup, or were you so young and naive that you just kind of were getting lost in the moment?
A little bit of both, Johnny. And I think that team was so special because we were a group of guys all in the same kind of parts of our career. Yeah, we had Marian Hossa, a superstar across the league who had been doing it for years. We had these young kids, Kane and Taves, who were 21 years old, who were league all-stars. But for the most part, we were a bunch of guys in our 20s. We're living in Chicago. We all cared about each other on and off the ice. It was a close-knit group. And the year before, we had won 2 playoff rounds. We played the Calgary Flames, the Vancouver Canucks, very emotional, hard-fought series. Detroit gets us in the conference finals. So there was a feeling in Chicago that 2010 was a year that, hey, if we can get to the conference finals with this young, inexperienced group, maybe we can take a step and try to compete for that Stanley Cup. So there were some internal expectations. We felt like we had a team that could compete and win. But more than anything, it was just a fun group to be a part of on and off the ice, and what a ride it was.
Sharpie, the one thing that really jumps out to me was I felt like that was the season where Duncan Keith became not just, he was always a very good and talented defenseman, but he became an elite defenseman. I mean, I think that he had a stretch there of maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years where I thought he was top 3 defenseman in the league. So what did you see from your vantage point with this guy? Because he was eating a lot of minutes in that playoff run.
Yeah, he was a stud. He really took his game to another level. He was a partner on the back end with Brent Seabrook for a lot of years. And you go back 10 years, they were, arguably the top shutdown defense pair in the National Hockey League. They provided offense, but 2010 was a year where those guys also went to the Olympic Games, played for Team Canada, won a gold medal. And you mentioned Duncan Keith. That was the tournament where I was watching from back in Chicago, just how big the stage was. Duncan is from Vancouver area, playing at home for his country. It seemed like he got better as that tournament went on, and there was no situation that he was going to look scared or be timid in. Now fast forward about 6 months later to the Stanley Cup Finals, and we don't get there without the play of Duncan Keith. Brent Seabrook's another one. Kane and Taves were big players in that Olympic tournament. That gold medal game was fun to watch, to see all the Blackhawks involved in it. But yeah, Dunks took strides back in 2010, and he's still doing it. He's 10 years later. He wants to compete. It'll be fun to see those guys get in the playoffs again.
I'm sure that this particular championship was special to you because it was the first time for Chicago in 49 years. So it meant so much to the city. But then you guys won again. And then you won again. So the fact that you won 3 cups in just 6 seasons is amazing. Did you have a sense back in 2010 that this could not only be a championship team once, but multiple times?
Maybe not in 2010. It was a difficult year for us because we knew the salary cap was going to kick in that off season, that we were going to make a lot of changes personnel-wise. I forget the exact number, but 10, 11 guys were out the door a week after we won the Stanley Cup. There were some big trades with the then Atlanta Thrashers. A lot of the depth players from our team that year in 2010 went on to be great players with other organizations. They were captains, all-stars, impact players across the league. So that season we felt like, hey, this might be our last time as a group of 23, 24 players. Let's do everything we can to kind of win this. Now, got to give the Blackhawks organization and management a lot of credit. 2 years we lose in the first round, and then all of a sudden we get an influx of players in 2013 and kind of round out our depth, kept the core group of players together, and we were able to take another crack at it. But 2010 was very special. A bunch of young guys that came up together, and our last game on the ice together as a group was an overtime winner by Patrick Kane, and we're Stanley Cup champs.
Now, Sharpie, it all sounds like a fairy tale the way you just spun it. I'm getting goosebumps, but that wasn't always the case when you got to Chicago. When you were traded from Philly to Chicago, what was your initial reaction? Because the Blackhawks were not the team that you're describing right now that went on to win 3 cups.
No, they weren't, and I feel bad even talking about it because things have changed so much in the city of Chicago. But man, I went from Philadelphia, who, let's go back, I don't know, what was it, 15 years ago? We had all-star talent across the board. Jeremy Roenick, Simone Gagne, Mark Recchi, Keith Primo. I could go on. And that was a team that was competing at the top of the Eastern Conference, trying to win a Stanley Cup themselves. I was just a young kid looking for an opportunity to play. The lockout had just happened. A lot of guys that were playing in the American League had graduated to the NHL and having great success in the league. I was one of those guys, but I was yet to have that success. So being traded to Chicago was probably a blessing for me at that point in my career. But Johnny, it was a lot different, man. The building was not full. There was about 7,000 or 8,000 people per game at home. The home games weren't televised locally in Chicago. Rocky Wirtz takes the team over. John McDonough's got a lot to do with how things change off the ice. And we've got this young core group of guys that just want to win and be great players in the league. Add Joel Quenneville to the mix, and we got a good thing cooking there. So it wasn't all awesome. It wasn't like 2010 every single year. There were some down years, 2005, 6, 7, but you could certainly feel some excitement gaining as we added some top players.
Johnny was mentioning earlier about the big six. There's obviously on every Stanley Cup winner, there's role players, there's depth, there's timely goals. The one thing, and I want to hear from your mouth, not mine, but from my vantage point, and we've heard you guys speak on it over the years with Kaner and Taves. Corey Crawford in the second 2 cups is probably one of the more, not from you guys, but for the rest of the hockey world, one of the more underappreciated players on that team. That I felt like, I was one of them that thought that he was a little overrated because he's playing with such talent. And then I got to play in the Western Conference, and I always felt like when the games were bigger, Corey Crawford was lights out, and he had just kind of had that ice in his veins. Can you talk about how important he was in those second 2 cups?
Yeah, he was huge, and he doesn't, maybe locally in Chicago, we've finally given him some appreciation of what he deserves. But in 2010, he was not a part of it. Antti Niemi was the goaltender, and Crow was a little bit of a late bloomer. Spent a lot of time in the American Hockey League, played a ton of seasons there. Then all of a sudden, he steps into the Blackhawks organization. 2011, he becomes the starter, wins 2 cups in 13 and 15. We had a chance in 2014 there. Finally, he starts getting recognized with Hockey Canada, plays in some international tournaments. But yeah, Crow is a guy that, in 2013, Rupper, if you go back to it, I think Stanley Cup Finals, game 4 or 5, they're trying to figure out who's going to win the Conn Smythe, right? That's what we do in the media. We're saying who's having the great seasons. Krejci for Boston was one of them. Tuukka Rask was certainly being talked about. But Crow was a guy that names were being kicked around. And in Chicago, we felt like he was playing great hockey for us, and we don't get to that Stanley Cup Final without Corey Crawford. Kaner scores 2 goals in game 5, plays great in game 6, and wins the Conn Smythe. But you could have pointed that trophy towards Corey Crawford as well. He was that important for us, and he's doing great still to this day. I know he's excited to get in the playoffs, and seems like he's getting better the older he gets.
So many great memories, and we really appreciate you taking the time to share some stories from the many years of success in Chicago, but especially as we celebrate the 10-year anniversary of when things really all began there for the Blackhawks. Thanks so much, Sharpie.
All right, thanks, Jamie.